Welcome back to the Grand Prairie City Council meeting, second half of our December 16th meeting. We will head into our public hearings. We had no scheduled delegations this evening, so we'll go into our public hearings. I would call to order the public hearing for bylaw, land use bylaw amendment C 1260-113. I would look to Mr. DeRoche for an introduction.
Thank you, Mayor Given. This is an administration-initiated amendment to improve processes and facilitate future projects. The current land use bylaw requirements indicate that signs must be posted on properties that are subject of a proposed rezoning, and it currently contains an exception for rezonings in accordance with an approved OP, simply because the OP process requires notification and advertising and significant public engagement, so it avoids certain redundancies. This amendment proposes to expand those exemptions to rezonings intended to incorporate annexed lands into the city's land use bylaw or to implement a new area redevelopment plan. For these ones, the amendments are either more clerical in nature or are part of a process that already involves significant notification and engagement. So the benefits of this is to reduce significant waste in the printing of a large number of signs. It also reduces the cost of having to print a large number of signs. So for example, if we were to do a rezoning to incorporate the annexed lands into the city's LUB, it would cost around almost $60,000 in printing alone. So this could be a significant savings and improvement to our processes. So where does this apply? It's proposed that it would only be for city-initiated rezonings, so an outside applicant couldn't use this clause to get around posting signs. It applies when the rezoning involves 3 or more parcels. The logic there is that if it's 2 or 3 parcels, it's reasonable to post signs on the properties, and then beyond that, administration can use their discretion as to what's appropriate. And it applies to, as I mentioned, annexed lands and ARPs. So for annexed land, the reasoning behind this is that lands that have been annexed into the city remain under the county land use bylaw as it was the day the annexation order took effect. So currently, most of our rural service area is under the county's land use bylaw as it was on January 1st, 2016. And this creates a lot of potential confusion down the line because when someone comes in for a permit, they may be unsure whether they are looking for the current county land use bylaw, the city land use bylaw, or trying to find a copy of the 2016 county LUB. So over time, this becomes more of a potential for confusion and problems in development process. So the city may want to initiate a rezoning to change these properties to a very similar designation within the city land use bylaw, which wouldn't impact the property owner's development rights. In the case of an area redevelopment plan, it may be helpful for implementing the ARP itself. So if we wanted to encourage infill development in an ARP area, to facilitate that process, we would rezone the properties as we adopt the ARP, and that way a landowner wouldn't have to go through a costly and timely rezoning process when they want to redevelop their property. Now, this would require that the ARP contains the specific land use district intended for those parcels. And so right now, all of our ARPs only contain generalized land use concepts, so it couldn't be applied for current ARPs, but in the future, it would be a tool that the city could choose to use. Although this takes away one form of notification, subject property owners and adjacent property owners are still required to be notified through the other methods. So that includes letters, notices on the city website, and advertising in the local newspaper. So summary, this is an amendment to improve processes and reduce waste. It will allow city-initiated rezonings to be exempt from requirements for posting signs on a large number of properties for annexed lands and ARP processes, and there will still be other required notification for property owners. And administration recommends that council adopt this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. DeRoche. An opportunity for any questions for administration from council. Are there any questions from administration at this stage? Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you, Mayor Given. Just a question about how annex property works in terms of rezoning. I know there's certain obligations we have to annex properties in terms of the tax rates they get set in that matching the county, but when it comes to zoning, is there any restrictions or any rights that landowners in annex lands have that landowners elsewhere might not have?
Through the mayor, so we are required to maintain their development rights as they were, and the intent here would be for any of these rezonings to accompany other LUB amendments to accommodate that.
So, and sorry, just to be a little bit more clear, is it if we want to rezone land in recently annexed places to bring it into conformance with our land use bylaw, is that just the same as rezoning any other piece of land, or do they have any protections against rezoning that other landowners might have, or just how does it work if we want to rezone annexed land? Is it the same as rezoning anything else?
Thank you, through the mayor. So I would have to. The project isn't that far along yet. I have to do a more thorough review of the annexation order. My understanding is that if it's initiated by us, it doesn't cause any of the triggering events. But that will be something that will require further scrutiny if we decide to move forward with such an amendment.
Thanks, Councillor Bessie. So, Mr. Drosh, I have a question for you. So, with respect to an approved ARP, in the slide deck, there was sort of a reference to a relatively recently approved ARP. The idea being that if there's a significant public process where there's lots of consultation that goes on in the development of an ARP, then it stands to reason that within some period of time that you shouldn't necessarily need to post. Is that kind of the thinking behind that?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So yes, so it doesn't explicitly state a timeline. It would be up to the city's discretion as to what's a reasonable amount of time to elapse. And the idea is it would either be most likely occur at the same time as adopting the ARP or very shortly afterwards.
Okay, and so just to clarify, then the proposed new section 28.3.c. It doesn't seem to say, does it, how does the city have discretion? I guess where I'm going is I would have a concern. I'm wondering about how long after a significant public process, how long will people remember, I guess is kind of the point that I'm getting to. And does administration have some discretion to say, no, in that case, maybe it has been too long? I'm thinking about one that we've gone through with the Hillside redevelopment plan. And I'm wondering how long I would expect people that live in that neighborhood to remember that we just had that discussion. So can you maybe use the Hillside, and I understand what you said, that this wouldn't apply to any recently approved ARPs. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so, but let's say we just went through the process that we did with Hillside in some new area, in some other area of the city. How long would administration imagine that you wouldn't need to post a sign to do a rezoning that was that conformed to the ARP?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We didn't put a specific timeline just to leave it to administration's discretion, but it would be a matter of months, not a matter of years.
Okay. And so, okay, so administration, so your view is that administration would have that discretion. Where in the bylaw, where in the land use bylaw does it show that administration has that discretion? Because I don't read it necessarily. I get the last statement that says public information signs are not required if the proposed amendment to the bylaw is an applicant, and then it goes on to say and then consistent with an approved ARP, but it doesn't. So it says they're not required if it's consistent with an approved ARP.
So, Mr. Mayor, it'd be similar to the clause with outline plans. It would be up to planning staff. It doesn't need to explicitly say here to use our discretion. It's just our practice, use our discretion.
Okay. Any other questions for administration at this stage? Councillor Bressie?
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm curious if there was any conversation or any discussion about not completely discarding the need for signs, but changing the rules against signs in terms of if you're doing large swaths, you don't need to have them as frequently as you might for a different type of rezoning. But was there any thought of saying, well, we might require putting up a few signs going into the general area, or was there any discussion about alternatives that went into the formation of this amendment?
Through the mayor, the intent here was just so that city administration wouldn't be forced to provide unnecessary signs. The expectation is that in cases where it's practical and depending on the specific project, administration would still provide notification signs when appropriate.
Okay. Any other questions for administration? We'll have another chance. We can get a chance to think about it. Although by the looks of the delegations here, we might not have a lot of time before we come around to that second chance for questions. I don't see any other questions from council. So I will the presentation submission portion of the public hearing, and I'll ask if there's anyone who wishes to come forward to speak to this public hearing matter. I will say for the audience watching at home, there's nobody here in council chambers other than staff and media. So it doesn't look like there's any members of the public coming forward on this issue, but I'll ask again just to make sure, and a third time. And I don't see anybody coming forward. So council, one last opportunity for questions for administration before I close the public hearing and we move on to business arising. I'm going to follow my train of thought. I just want to, Mr. Roche, so where in the land use bylaw is it clear that administration has, I'm really concerned, sorry, I'll raise for you my concern, and so you can tell me how it's answered in the land use bylaw. Particularly in areas that are existing, that would be subject to area redevelopment plans, where there are neighbors who have lived in their houses for some long period of time, where people move in and out. I'm worried that a public process basically is forgotten or stale after a certain period of time. And I'm trying to decide at what stage should we start to require notice so that people can be informed about things that are happening in their neighborhood. Is that 1 year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time? And if it isn't a specific amount of time, where in the land use bylaw does it say that administration has the flexibility to say, no, actually we are going to require signage? Sort of, can you answer that concern? I just want to make sure that we don't have things happening in people's neighborhoods that they weren't aware of.
So, Mr. Mayor, this is for cases where it's the city itself that would be posting the signs. And so there's no specific statement in there in what circumstances we would or wouldn't, other than providing an exemption for ARP and annexed land projects. The lack of specificity on things like timelines is mainly to provide flexibility depending on the nature of the project. So for example, for the annexed lands, it wouldn't really be a timeline trigger. An ARP, it would be reasonable to expect some sort of timeline, but we want to leave it up to each individual project. It may be a mechanism that we don't even use. My expectation is that this would typically be applied with rezonings occurring on the same day as the ARP, but it is not specified at all.
And so then just on this point about the ARP, so is it administration's intent, and is it clear that this would only apply to applications by the city for parcels in an approved ARP?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it does say specifically an application by the city.
Okay, so it would have to be an application by the city for 3 or more parcels consistent with an approved ARP. So I'm in an older area that has an ARP, and the city is proposing to rezone 2 parcels. The city would be required to post a sign.
Yes.
The city is proposing to rezone 3 parcels. The city would not be required to post a sign, or it would have discretion.
Yes, so the number is somewhat arbitrary. The idea is that we would use our discretion when it's a reasonable number of parcels. There's not an exact number. That helps me understand. And it doesn't apply to private landowners proposing to rezone. So if somebody buys 3 parcels, 3 directly adjacent parcels, and proposes to rezone them to something that's higher density yet consistent with the ARP, would that private landowner be required to post a sign? The private landowner would be required to post a sign.
Okay. So it really is specific to the city taking that action. That's the big differentiator here.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So it is intended for a very, very specific scenario. The original amendment was initiated due to trying to address the issue with the annexed lands. And we were exploring new tools to facilitate infill development through the ARP process. And this came up during the review of this amendment. And we decided to include it to provide that opportunity in the future. It may or may not be used.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Thanks for helping me understand its application. Okay. Any other questions for administration? Councillor Clayton?
So now you've got me thinking. So, question for administration. Tell me the justification. It's at discretionary use for the city to notify if the parcels are 3 or greater. I'm wondering, I guess my concern is a piece of land that's 3 or greater is fairly substantial, and to not have public notification on a substantial piece of land is even more concerning, because if you're changing one small piece of land, it's probably not going to implicate or impact the future of that area as much as when you go 3 or bigger, you're changing something fairly substantial. So I'm wondering what I'm missing.
So through the mayor, so we're just providing an exception to the requirement for signage. There's still letters that are sent out to the subject property owner and adjacent property owners and advertising in the newspaper. And the intent here is that it would be part of the ARP process. So they would have gone through several open houses and all the information process that goes involved in creating a new ARP as well. The idea is that,
So what is the notification? How does it differ in the annex land? The notification area, how does it differ as opposed to traditional urban notification? Like in a residential area, I know who you notify. How does it change in an annexed area?
So through the mayor, in the annexed area, it's the same as any other process for notification. It's still letters to the owners and adjacent property owners and advertising in the newspaper. This amendment is simply to provide the exemption to the signage, because for the annexed lands, that's 291 parcels. It's just a very large number of signs. There would still be more of a public information campaign given the situation, the potential for confusion or concerns from landowners in the annexed area. There would still be significant communications. It just wouldn't be posting signs on every single property.
Sure. So I'm curious, have you done a cost analysis of multiple signs compared to multiple newspaper and radio ads?
Mr. Drosh?
Through the mayor, the challenge is that signs are only a requirement that the city has in the land use bylaw. Newspaper ads are required by the Municipal Government Act. And so the costs may be similar for each. Right. However, we don't have the option to not post ads.
We're required to do newspaper ads, but we can choose not to do signs. Okay. I see the Director of Infrastructure and Economic Development.
Thank you, Mayor Given. And I think just to go back to a point that Mr. DeRoche made earlier, this is intended to occur shortly after one of these intensive public processes, whether it be an outline plan or an ARP, which would be a city-initiated process that we would then immediately, or the intent is to immediately rezone en masse. So you know, if you used Hughes Lake for an example, and let's say we went further in Hughes Lake and did an outline plan for the entirety of Hughes Lake, you could imagine putting a sign every 270 meters on public land, and what value would we get for taxpayer dollars in that scenario. So I think that's where he's trying to get, you know, the magnitude of some of these rezonings that have just gone through a public process where people in that area had the opportunity to come in and comment on those uses. If we were to immediately rezone things right after, that's more so the intent of this. And if there's a concern about the timelines, I'm not sure if that's something we could address and say that within X months. I don't think we would have to do any more engagement on that. I don't think that would be a material change to the bylaw. I'd defer to the city clerk.
So I appreciate, so you're trying to give us some advice if that was a hang up for council, that potentially we could amend this to say an ARP approved within the past 12 months or something like that. If council could set the amount of time that we'd be willing to sort of grant that latitude to administration. Is that kind of what you're suggesting? Okay. Councillor Clayton?
Thanks, Mayor Given. So just one more question for Mr. DeRoche. For me, the sign piece is, it's really not, it's more of a perception piece that we're notifying people. Because I think if you're driving down a rural road, you're probably going to say, oh, what's that sign? And you're probably not going slow down to read it. You're going to go, hey, phone your local whoever and say, hey, I saw a sign up, what's happening? It just sort of creates attention. You know, the biggest piece about not putting signs up is the transparency piece. And although we are doing all the traditional processes, I don't want the perception to be that we're pushing through en masse land changes without proper notification, because the people that are implicated have been notified, but the other people that maybe aren't notified, things happen and change, and they're like, well, how did that happen? I drove through there last week and I didn't even see a sign. Well, you weren't notified because you're not an adjacent landowner. And so, you know, as long as we need to, I guess, have confidence in the process of the public forum piece and the notification piece, and maybe you own land adjacent, maybe you don't own land adjacent in the annexed area, but maybe you own across the highway, but you drive that way to work every day. It's not directly impacting you, but it's still part of your overall, you know, whatever, if that becomes a fairly heavy industrial commercial area, it's still related to across highway adjacent landowners. And sometimes I know adjacent is only touching. So I just want to be confident that the process of communication is very, very thorough. And we have had comments in the past that sometimes even in smaller residential changes, that the process of communication hasn't been as thorough as people would like. Because I get it, people, you put up a sign and everybody reads it, not everybody sees it, not everybody understands what's going on, but that open communication, especially when it's bare, sort of unfragmented land that has many possibilities, I think is even more important than when it becomes one single lot in an urban setting, because it sort of the landscape of the future of that annexed land is sort of put into place by these en masse sort of changes. So the communication needs to be very, very thorough, in my opinion. The sign here or there, I agree, it's not really a big issue. It's more the setting the tone for the future of what's going to happen in that land, and so make sure that people are aware of what's happening through open and thorough communication. Thanks.
So, to the
Mr.
mayor.
Roche?
So this amendment simply provides us with these tools. The actual process for implementing them will involve council oversight. So the creation of an ARP, that process involves several check-ins with council, and the decision whether or not to proactively rezone properties would be part of what council would influence. In the terms of the annexed land, it would be a much larger amendment than simply rezonings. That would require significant changes to the land use bylaw, the creation of some new uses, some new districts. That process would likely have some reporting to committee for the initiation. And through these check-ins, council would be able to have input on the communication process, whether or not that involves multiple signs in the different areas. And also, when these items go for a public hearing, there is a communication section of the report, and council will be able to hold administration account to their communications process.
Mr. Roche, so on the ARP side of it, and appreciate point 2 there kind of really has a couple of qualifiers in 2 different issues, I guess, ARPs and annexation area. But on the ARP side, can you give me like a hypothetical use case? Where would this come into play in a hypothetical situation?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So say, for instance, that the city was creating an ARP for an area where there was a significant demand for redevelopment and an adjustment to the intensity of some of the uses. Say some of the areas were switching from residential transition to medium density residential, and there were people who were landowners in that area that were interested in this next level of development. If the communication process, the engagement process for the ARP revealed that, then it may be valuable for the city to initiate the rezoning as it's adopting the ARP, and that way the landowner then doesn't have to come in and say, hey, you've approved this ARP allowing me to build higher density, I'd like to move forward, but then we have to ask them to pay for an application and go through a whole rezoning process.
Thank you for that. And so would there be, would the intent therefore, would the intent to be to do that rezoning concurrent with the approval of the ARP? So you go through a public process, there's the area redevelopment, and there's an engagement process. There's landowners that say, hey, this is great, we'd like to go to this density and this tract of stuff. And council meeting faces a public hearing on adopting an ARP. And would that be the time where there would also be the rezoning happening? That's what I think I heard you describe, is that at one meeting we're approving an ARP that also approves rezoning of land within that ARP.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that is what we see as the most likely scenario. There are some potential reasons why the two might be set on separate nights, so maybe a matter of weeks. But the idea is that they would be happening in a very short sequence or on the same night.
Okay. So that's really helpful to me. And if there is that kind of clarity, within an ARP approved within the past, approved within 6 months, recently approved within 6 months or something to that effect, I could really understand that. As you start to get further and further away, I just would be worried that people would not see things coming. Okay. Thank you very much for helping me understand how this would be used. I really appreciate that. Any other questions for administration before we close the public hearing? Seeing none, then I'll close the public hearing. We'll move on to business arising. I'd look for a motion for first reading. Can I get a motion for first reading? Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Mayor Will-Given. I move the council give the first reading to bylaw C 1260-113, being an amendment to the land use bylaw.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Minhas. No discussion or debate on first reading. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Can I have a motion for second reading?
Give the second reading to the bylaws C 1260-113.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Minhas. Any discussion or debate on second reading? I'll say that I would prefer to support this with an amendment that defines sort of how new that ARP has to be for this public notification to be waived, essentially, or for administration to have that flexibility. I don't know if there's a council member that wishes to do that. I believe within our procedure bylaw, I could do that. No, not within the procedure bylaw. Oh, maybe the whole darn. Yeah. Well, I think the so as I read that, an application by the city, so it's only by us, only for 3 or more parcels. That part's clear. That is consistent with an ARP approved within, and then time period. I'm not sure. 6 months. I appreciate what Mr. Drosh said. 6 months or a year. I guess that would be the question: is you go through a public process, and how long is it reasonable to expect people to remember that happened, so they're not surprised? Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'd like to amend the motion to and the amendment to say an item A2, an application by the city for 3 or more parcels that consistent with an approved ARP for no longer than, a minimum of 6 months, or is to integrate annex land into this bylaw. 6 months notice, or is to integrate annex land into this bylaw.
So an ARP approved within
6 months.
Past 6 months, yeah. Okay. Is that clear for? Okay, so that's a motion to amend second reading. Yeah.
I appreciate the notification. I wouldn't want it to be any longer than 6 months. I think that's more than reasonable. If administration is comfortable that 6 months isn't too long, I guess I would, if other people around the table are interested in having it even a little bit less, but reasonable notice, that's fine. I wouldn't want it to go any longer than 6 months. I think, I don't want the intent of this amendment, in my opinion, is not to slow down any process. It's to be transparent and make sure that there's adequate time for notification.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Any other discussion or debate? I'll say that I'll support second reading with that amendment. I think it just does provide that confidence that people in their neighborhoods will know what's happening, especially in areas where we're proposing redevelopment and significant change. The annexation side, I'm not concerned about at all. I think that's totally fine. Any discussion or debate on Councillor Clayton's amendment? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote on Councillor Clayton's amendment. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. So we're on to second reading as amended. Any discussion or debate on second reading as amended? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries as well. Councillor Minhas. Third reading.
Can have third reading bylaw C 1260-113 at this meeting.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Minhas. This is a motion to have third and final reading of land use bylaw amendment as amended here at this council meeting. Is there any discussion or debate as to the merits of having third and final reading? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does pass unanimously. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you. I'll move the council give the third reading bylaw C1260-133 being amended to land use bylaw.
Thanks very much, Councillor Minhas. Any discussion or debate on that third and final reading? Again, seeing nobody ringing in, I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. That concludes all of our public hearing business. Thank you very much to administration for guiding us through the use of that proposed amendment. We had no delegations this evening, so we'll move into council member reports from our external agencies, boards, and commissions. And I know, Councillor Thiessen, you were away, and so you said you had a number to report on. So maybe I'll just turn to you, and if you can introduce them.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Mayor. Given at one point I will turn the microphone over to my cohort to my right here, Mr. Wade Palat, to report on the airport. But I guess I'll start with the downtown BIA. The board met on November 27th. I wasn't actually at that meeting. I was on the highway going to Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance meeting. But I was assured by Wendy Bosch, the executive director, that everything that we discussed in our executive committee meeting would just translate right through to the general board meeting. So just to highlight some of the things that we discussed the new investment opportunities brochure for the Downtown Association. Some of you have already seen it at a Rotary sit-down where Ms. Bosch had presented it there. But this is out for consumption, I guess, of the general public to see what kind of opportunities exist within our city center. There's also discussion around budget deliberations regarding the city center sign. Of which I said it's pretty vague right now. We got to finish our signs and see, as per the agreement, if there's money left over, we might be able to invest in that. So I fettered them down there a bit. We also talked about downtown construction. All the downtown businesses were I guess told to take a vote as to if they want it to happen and when they want it to happen, 2020 or 2021. And as it turned out, of all the respondents, there was 25 total. 20 were in favor of proceeding with the downtown construction, 5 were opposed. And of those 20, 18 were for 2021. And of the 5 opposed, 4 were for 2021 if it had to happen. So that's why we do polls, I guess, so we can understand where it was. There was talk about some of the events that are going on, and we looked at the next 2-month calendar for events in the downtown, and also we're urged, and I am urging council, to check out the new City Center website if you get the chance while you're online. It's definitely a great and updated refresher to the old website of the Downtown Association. That's my report for the Downtown BIA. So I might as well go right on forward to the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance, if you'll just bear with me while I flip through my sheets. It was a pretty brief meeting. We hadn't met in a while, and we thought it was a good idea. Our board chair called the meeting to have that out in McLennan on the same day, in November 27th. And there was discussion around the budget, the provincial budget, and what it meant for WPACs and watershed stewardship groups. We had heard a bunch of rumors, but those rumors were confirmed with a phone call midway through our meeting from the minister's office, informing us that the WPACs, 11 total, are getting a 4-year commitment at an overall 15% reduction of the total funding to $3.2 million in allocations. Now, what that means for the Mighty Peace Watershed is we actually will receive even less than that overall 15% reduction, and we're trying to figure that out why. Since we have the most land and the most water in the entire province and the least amount of staff, as to why we would see a $60,000 reduction overall in our funding for that. So there's definitely a lobby that we're going to have to do, and from our provincial representative Abdi, who sits on the board with us, he said that AEP is restructuring how they view the WPACs, and they are currently in the process of creating a North and South division instead of 5 regions that are recognized by the province, which is pretty nebulous because there's 11 WPACs around, so I don't know. I think they each represent a different region. So again, there's a bit of confusion there that we're going to have to sort out with the province. So there was some discussion on what this means for the watershed. We've already reduced staff by 1. We don't have an admin assistant. We won't be able to continue with this level of funding moving forward without the admin assistant, I guess. So we'll just have to work with the 2 staff that we had and we originally started out and began with. So there's a call out to all members to follow the City of Grande Prairie's lead, which is to contribute more money into the watershed. So that is our fundraising goal moving into the new year, as well as finishing up some of our other projects, such as the stream bank stabilization and the Grimshaw Gravels Aquifer Source Water Protection Plan. We want to make sure that people really understand the value of their water and where it comes from, and ensure that they're well educated and that there are plans in place we're starting to build all across the province. So, but it's going to be significantly harder with only 2 staff and no admin assistants to coordinate and organize that. So look forward to the next meeting. I believe it is on January the 28th. I'd have to check my calendar again, but hopefully Councillor Bressy will be able to attend with me, and we'll go from there. So that is the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance. Next on my list is the Peace Library System. And just to speak fairly quickly on this one, the Peace Library System had our meeting on November the 30th, as I try to get through my papers here. We discussed a lot of things that we typically do at our year-end meeting, which is a lot of policy changes and rearrangements and stuff like that. But the board was a bit blindsided by the sudden announcement of the retirement of Linda Duplessis, our executive director, for the entire duration of my entire duration of Peace Library System. She's been there for a while, 30 years in total, since it opened. And she cited a love for the libraries and a love for what she does, but also a love for her grandchildren who live out in Australia. And she really wanted to take a half a year to a year. And at her increasing age, she wanted to go be grandma and work on that. So the board was quite shocked by that, which made for perhaps a bigger turnout at our annual Peace Library Systems Christmas staff party. So we're quite surprised with that, but she will be on until July 31st, 2020, at which point her retirement will kick in. And so the board will be undertaking a process of looking for a new executive director at Peace Library Systems. And the only other thing to really note of that, besides that, was there was a bit of discussion inside of our policy revisions. There was a note from the minister asking libraries to contribute their input on how we could reduce red tape. Now, the MGA and the Libraries Act, requires that we appoint 1 person, but typically the way it's written, we don't have alternates. And so there was a bunch of discussion on whether or not we should tell the government that we need voting alternates in case people can't make it to the library. It was a robust discussion debate. In fact, it was about 45 minutes. I thought I was in a community living committee meeting with Councillors Bressy and Palat, but we got through it. In the end, it was defeated, so we decided to not put that recommendation forward to the government, as we figured the municipalities who predominate the entire board and make up most of it, probably about 95% of the board, to just appoint their members. And if you're not there, you're not there. Their congregation's large enough that, it's be hard to not achieve quorum on a 36-member roundtable. So that was that for Peace Library System. And finally, Grand Spirit Foundation. I've had many meetings with them and meetings with ministers and assistant deputy ministers, largely around our permanent supportive housing project and a lot of the work that the City of Grande Prairie is doing in conjunction with Grand Spirit Foundation as far as finding and creating permanent supportive housing structures for people within our community. So on November the 21st at our last board meeting, the board approved by consent that we would help with permanent supportive housing and add that to our portfolio list, just to ensure that more people are housed and that there's a responsible representative there as well as the full and unconditional approval of helping out with the Parkside Inn project as far as doing the management of the accounts of rent that is due and all that stuff. So it's been very busy with that. I guess I could talk for a while, but I'm starting to run out of breath. So there was some good motions made there, and definitely some good things coming forward from the province. I will just throw on a side note, I was extremely buoyed, not bored. See, I'm talking too much. I was buoyed to have that meeting with the Assistant Deputy Minister of the province in seniors and housing, and they seemed very encouraged by Grand Prairie's direction and working with Grand Spirit Foundation and with our community social development in trying to find a permanent supportive housing complex for people who require those services within our community inside of a housing structure, and even more buoyed when they said this is a need in your area, so let's do what we can in order to ensure this. So really happy to be on board with Grand Spirit for that. Really happy for the work that Catherine Shepard and the Community Social Development Department, Henry DeRose, who's no longer here, I guess, have put into sort of cement that in the consciousness of our provincial government. So hopefully we'll be seeing some new builds coming right away for the lands that we prepared for.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Mine will only be about 10 minutes longer than Councillor Thiessen's updates here. So I'll start off with a board that both Councillor Thiessen and I are appointed to with the Airport Authority. So just quick passenger traffic year to date. Would be the numbers till the end of October. Is down 3%. So not a big drop, but it is something that we want to be cognizant of that moving forward. That hopefully this isn't a trend that continues. There was a couple of capital projects that have been updated. That the new payment system is completed and operational, so the new technology has greatly improved the reliability and customer experience. You may have noticed if you've been driving by the airport recently, there's some new fencing up on the 116th Street side, you'll notice, as well as along the highway side. So that's been replaced, dating back over 40 years. The preliminary design works for future expansion of the airport public and parking road networks are complete and ready for future work as well. The 2020 fiscal plans are now complete. The operation budget reflects a basically inflationary impact. In light of the economic challenges in our province and uncertainty in our agricultural force and oil and sectors, has seriously considered the appropriate path forward. So I think that they're on the right path, and I think Councillor Thiessen in our first meeting got to be part of that plan. So hopefully next year we'll have a little bit more input into it than we had this year. It was kind of our first meeting, and it was kind of like approve or not approve. So hopefully we'll be a little bit more involved in years to come. A couple other, just if I can go on there, given just one other committee that we had met was our Economic Development Committee. Rebecca Lee had put together, and we had several members from the public join us to talk about our industrial strategy. We had the consultant up, so it was a good conversation from the members at large, as well as Rebecca and Cindy, and I believe Chris was a gentleman from the consultant we hired. So looking forward to seeing what will come with that in the future as well. And lastly, wasn't Archives Board specific, but I'm still part of the Archives Planning Committee, and we had several meetings discussing a future home of archives, and started meeting with an engineering firm in town to start looking at site selection and potentially coming to committee here in the new year to work with the city on identifying the piece of land. Thanks, Mayor Given.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Platt. We're doing external reports, and we've started a good rotation here. Councillor Friesen, you had some as well?
Thank you, and I'll actually start with the archives, since that was the last one referred to. Oh, sorry. So I attended a South Peace Regional Archives special meeting, not one of the regular board meetings, but that was great because it was the first one that I was able to, they had since I've been appointed to that one. So it was a good overall look at the archives, because it was the strategic plan progress assessment, and the future planning committee is working hard to identify potential sites and what what they may get into for a building or an addition or whatever else in the future. So they're very much looking forward to that. But the Friends of the South Peace Regional Archives met and dissolved this fall, and that had been in the plans in the works for a little while, so it was not a surprise or anything like that. So they left a little bit of money to the archives, not a ton, but a little bit. Very busy there. They are down a 0.6 position, and when you only have 2 remaining 2.0 FTEs, that's a great deal of your staff. So they've noticed a significantly busy year. So they're feeling like they're only just barely keeping up. And what they spend a lot of their time doing that's very time consuming is actually cataloging and readying for storage the donations that they get to, and that's quite costly because it does take quite a bit of time to do all of that, depending on what they get. So that's what's keeping them very busy. They one of the big wins for this year was community engagement. They've had a fantastic year with social media, with bringing people into with the museum and the archives, and they've had great attendance as well at their events that they hold periodically over the year. And I also had the library board. Sorry. Golly, here we go. Another big win for the library board this year is community engagement. They've had a fantastic year with bringing people into the library, and lots of new groups and meetings at the library as well. The Library of Things, which if you haven't heard about, it's where you can go and sign out not just books, but cool things like snowshoes, or the little computer thing, the thing that plugs into your car to diagnose your engine, which Councillor Bressie can attest to having saved him hundreds of dollars a month or so ago. So the Library of Things is fantastic. So they went before 100 Women Who Care, and while they did not win the pot that night, they felt it was a great exposure for the Library of Things. Deb, who is the executive director, has been here for a year now, and it does seem to be going quite well. So she had her annual review and is, of course, invited to continue with the library. She's breathed, as new executive directors tend to do, just a different direction, a different energy, and lots of excitement into the library. And the strategy, the library board strategy, which is, I think, as I recall, it's a 10-year strategy, has been adopted. So that was an exciting moment because it is the second library in Alberta to have adopted a long-term strategy. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Friesen. We'll go to Councillor Bressie, I think, had a couple of updates for us.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Given. So I've got 2 for you. One is last week the Regional Recreation Committee met, and I think the 2 things worth highlighting for council was, one, we got a very great chart of all the work that the committee has put in, but more so the administrative working group behind the committee has accomplished so far and is hoping to accomplish the next year. And it's kind of an eye-opening event for me, realizing how much coordination is going on in our region because of that committee. And if council wants to see the full big chart, I'm happy to share it with you. But also, one of the directions we gave to the administrative working group is to put a simplified version up on the website, so it's easy both for our councils, but more importantly for the public to see how we're working together. Another thing to highlight from there is the committee gave direction, and there's already money budgeted for this, to update the state of recreation. So in 2015, it did a randomized survey of households asking how they're accessing recreation right now and how they'd hope to access recreation, and that's the data that went into the Regional Recreation Master Plan. Well, it's going to be 5 years old next year, so it'll be updated in 2020. There's going to be both a randomized survey and then also a social media / online campaign. So a randomized survey to get the random look, and then also an online campaign for anybody who wants to share their opinions. So looking forward to that. I think it'll give some good information for us. So that's the Regional Recreation Committee. And then a kind of related committee was actually today during our council break, there was a Sport Connector board meeting. And a few things to highlight there was Councillor Friesen today highlighted a lot of the highlights of that organization lately, including the really successful Sport Connector Conference. So there's already talks at the board meeting today about when and how we're going to pull off the next one of those because it was so well received. The executive director and the board chair of the Sport Connector are heading to Edmonton on Wednesday to meet with the Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism, and Status of Women, who also has sport in that portfolio. And there's about a dozen people that are going to be in that meeting, so it's fun that 2 of those spots are going to be for Grande Prairie and the North being represented. And then the last thing I'll mention is the first ever Winter Try-It Day is coming up. And we're really excited that's going to be happening. And something that was really cool was registration for that just opened up this morning at 3:30. As of 3:30 this afternoon, there were already 264 kids signed up, which was a cruel hard truth when I got home after that meeting quickly to register my kids because sports are already filling up. So if you haven't registered your kids yet, do that. Yeah, that's what I got for committee updates.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bressy. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I'm going to start off with Combative Sports Commission. There was an event was scheduled for last Friday. It was postponed till spring. The problem with hosting these events and putting them on is the athletes try very, very hard to get in their best shape, and sometimes they overdo it. Sometimes they become sick, and sometimes they become injured. So there was not enough events on the docket to put on a very good show for the promoter. He didn't feel that was good. So sometime in the spring, we'll have that event back in the system. I'm going to talk a little bit about community futures. We had our strategic plan this last week. We spent 8 hours discussing a number of things and the challenges that are going on. One of the things that I think that the futures are going to be focusing on this year is youth and getting the youth involved in some programs starting at a junior high level right up to graduation, and trying to find money, but also educating him in being a business manager, business owner. We also had the Western diversification people at the event, Tricia DeCourt, and Canadian Futures Northern Alberta, Phyllis Mackey. They spoke and taught and basically explained a number of the things that are changing in the system. And I can tell you right now, Grande Prairie is one of the leaders in loans. We started off with a mandate of let's try and get 12. That would be perfect for us this year. And we ended up having 22 loans. Putting down to a community down in southern Alberta, I won't mention any names, they've been averaging about 6 or 7 loans a year. We thought that the value of those 12 loans would be around $600,000, and the 22 loans that we did give out was $1.729 million. So there was quite a bit of money that was reinvested into the community, but most of all reinvested back into businesses that are serving the community and region. And just a short little introduction here to the ABMA, Alberta Bilingual Municipalities. We've been actually having a lot of telephone meetings, and we'll probably be getting together sometime in the new year to discuss both the provincial budget and the federal budget to see where we can get how it affects this board. And IDPA, I was very proud to be part of the International Day of Peoples with Disabilities, and the Inclusive Community Award winner goes to Wonderland Toy Team. Vince, the owner, did not want to take any credit. He wanted his team to be recognized, and he made sure that we put that on the award. He says, I own the building, I own the business, I own one in Prince George. He says, but I don't run the business. He says, our community does, and our staff. So very proud to have him as a very diversified business and inclusive, and all the good things that we look for, he is supplying to our community. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor. Given just briefly, it was already touched on earlier on the community services report, but I attended my first Grand Prairie Regional Tourism meeting, and as noted, Terry Dow, the new executive director, has recently reported to standing committee, and they are re-engaging the board and the community. Currently through doing an inventory process of which will enable us to build more packages, to promote the north, to encourage visitors and residents of Grande Prairie to visit, but to recognize that the region is a fun, vibrant place with plentiful amounts of tourism and different opportunities for people, and really create a must-see destination feel about the region. So it was a good first meeting. In turn, we also, as a group, the regional group agreed upon the sort of tagline of explore the greater Grande Prairie. So going forward, that you'll see that in many sort of ad campaigns they do, hashtag explore North Alberta. And so look forward to sitting on this committee and seeing what comes next in regards to the consultation process they're going through. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Clayton. I had two committees to update council on. First was SCORES. We had our annual SCORES steering committee meeting just before the dinner that we had that some council members were able to attend. I just wanted to update council that in the discussion there, the SCORES members approved giving direction to their combined administrations, basically to enable the booking fee that council passed during our budget discussions. And so the group agreed to give their administrations direction to approve, and I'm looking at the Director of Community Services, up to 15% administration fee or booking fee on top of charges for community gymnasiums. And so there was common agreement that if that was required, then that would be supported by the other members. So I just wanted to report that back to council since it was directly related to something out of our budget discussion. And then December 6th, I was in Edmonton for AUMA Municipal Governance Committee meeting. At that meeting, the committee was planning its work for the upcoming year. And in addition to a number of other areas, it was looking at, there's an understanding within the organization that there will be additional changes coming to the Municipal Government Act in the spring. It seems like it's the act that is never finished. But there are a number of different organizations that are proposing changes. AUMA has had a chance to look at some submissions from other industry associations. And there are some items that are, I think, a concern because unlike us, not everybody else has defined what they mean by red tape. In our bylaw and policy review committee, we identified what we meant or what we're going after. And there are some submissions, and there's one from an industry association that proposes to increase the authority of the Municipal Government Board to create a provincial level appeal board specifically for applicants in order to provide a forum for challenging municipal accountability on items such as engineering standards and approvals, offsite levies, zoning decisions, and permit decisions and timelines. So if the act was amended to allow anything like that, that would actually have the effect of allowing additional level of appeal or oversight over all of those kind of decisions, which I think is actually the exact opposite of getting rid of red tape. I think that would increase a significant amount and decrease municipal autonomy. So at our Municipal Governance Committee meeting, we were looking at that and looking at how AUMA will engage in any proposed changes to the Act and keeping track of what we're hearing from other organizations. So obviously relevant to City of Grande Prairie business, and we'll keep an eye on that and report back to Council. And just for Council's information, I will be out of town on Wednesday and Thursday this week with an AUMA board meeting, an AUMA and RMA Joint Operating Committee meeting, and an AMSC Alberta Municipal Services Corporation board meeting for the next couple of days. And with respect to committees, I was talking with Councillor Blackburn earlier today. He wanted first off to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, but also to thank his council colleagues for taking on the additional roles that many of you have in terms of distributing the council representation on different committees across all the rest of the council members that are here. And so Councillor Blackburn just wanted to thank everyone for taking on that extra load in his absence. That was my update on those two committees, and a word from Councillor Blackburn with respect to committees. Now we can go to Council Member Roundtable, and I will go back to Councillor Thiessen to start.
Do you ever want to end this meeting? Anyways.
I would suggest that it's up to council members about how many different events they want to update us on.
All right, so I'm gonna keep it as brief as I possibly can. Try to be brief. It's been a very busy little while. Just last week, I got off of the deputy mayor duties, so I passed the baton on to Councillor Bressie. But it was a glorious 3.5 months of pretending to be the mayor at different events here and there and giving greetings, but it's hard to pretend to be the mayor when you're saying, on behalf of Mayor Given. So it was really an honor and a thrill, so thanks very much for that tour of duty, Mayor Given. But since that time, over the last 2 weeks, I've gone to 7 Christmas parties. I've done 6 kettle shifts, and today I did 5 facility visits. I'm almost doing the 12 days of Christmas. I'd sing it, but I don't want to offend the viewers at home. But it was a glorious time. It just means that it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, and I'll just touch on a few of those today. There was a news article out there that the Salvation Army is still a little short on their fundraising campaign. So I encourage everybody, if you haven't contributed to Kettle, please do. And I encourage all the Kettle shift workers out there, if you're a decent singer, like I guess I am, because that's what people are telling me, sing your heart away, because people change those $5 bills into $20 bills, and you make their day as they walk out the door. So it's really, really good. And of course, Salvation Army does so many great things for our community, including feeding people, housing people, and giving people hope and faith moving forward. So that was great. And to all of our facility staff, everyone I got to visit all around, I just want to say thank you very much for being so glorious and so gracious in hosting us here today and coming and spending some time with the mayor, myself, and our CAO, Horacio Galante. And I know other council members. I just caught the tail end here today at City Hall, where I think Councillor Clayton and other members of council were there as well. But it's great to spread the cheer, great to spread the love, and great to send our staff away on a happy Christmas vacation. So love your family, hug your friends, and have yourself a very Merry Christmas. And to Councillor Blackburn, if you're still watching, because you just sent me a text, this seat I'm sitting in is yours. I'm just keeping it warm for you, man. So the new year approaches fast, and I can't wait to see you soon. That's my report.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Platt.
No, there's Hans. Thanks for their time. I did mention, or did forget to mention, I did have a storm board meeting as well. So just a quick update on that for the committees. The check game was a success. I don't know if anybody, I know Councillor Clayton was there to drop the puck, and it was a good success. The boys lost 6-4 after coming back and made the third period a pretty exciting game. Sponsorship is trending a little bit down, which is unfortunate, but we do have a home game tomorrow night to close out the season, and then hopefully we'll have a good 2020 for them as well. But overall numbers are okay for the Storm. I think our investments are okay, and that they're definitely doing all the right things inside that room to try to make it work. But tough economic conditions have lost them a few major sponsors. So with that, I'll go. The event that kind of stood out for me, it wasn't anything that was really glamorous, but was the 7 Gens event, just to talk about their new facility in Grande. And the reason it meant a lot to me is I know how many people are looking for work in the construction world right now. So it just says to me again what a great honor it is to have a company like 7 Gens in our community. This is a 60,000 square foot building that they're doing a really good job of promoting how they want to have local trades, local tenders. They're being very proactive and being very transparent and upfront about how they're going through the process. It was an eye opener just to see a local company that I think is taking things above and beyond of how many major projects have been done in Grande Prairie, and I think it's something that really hit home to me. They're very, very keen on, and talking to a lot of the vendors and trades on that, they want to use as much local people as possible. So it's just something that means a lot to me. So shout out to 7 Gens for another job well done and to keep that going. It'll be exciting. The new year starting probably February. It starts like the structure is going to start going up, and between February and May of next year, it'll be fun to drive by and see the 60,000 square foot site. Very, very cool facility in the fact that I think I counted 12 people that'll work in that building that won't have an exterior window. So for the most part, every single person that works in that building is going to have an exterior window, which I think is huge when you're working in an office environment every day. So well done to 7 Gens.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. The other night, so last week, Downtown Association had a customer appreciation night, and it was a great kickoff to the Christmas season for me. So I went down, and it was their first one that they've ever done. So it was a little bit quiet. Not everyone's used to it yet, like they are used to Vegas night. But I think they're going to do it again next year. So I'm looking forward to that. Downtown Association Customer Appreciation Night. And the other thing that I'll highlight from this week that was really great to be involved in was the GPRC Academic Programming Engagement Session with the direction that they're taking and their new Dr. Bob, I want to say Bob Murray, and of course Tim Heath, who joined recently as the VP of Academics. They are working really hard trying to figure out which degrees and which direction to go first with the college, and what potentially all the different directions that they could go, and all of the certificates, diplomas, programs, and degrees that they can offer. So it was great to be involved in that as a council. I know that there were a handful of us there, and it was a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, well, Mayor Given. I was out of service last 3 weeks, so my knee was cut off for replacement, so I just got the first meeting joined, so thank you.
We're happy to have you back, Councillor Minhas.
Miss all the fun for Christmas parties.
Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Yes, welcome back to Councillor Minhas. It's nice to have you here. Just a couple things that have been touched on, but I wanted to mention that sometimes things get pretty hectic, and on December 5th, I had an opportunity to attend 3 events in one evening. It was a little bit of, I literally was changing outfits in my vehicle, so it was a little bizarre. But anyways, I pulled a decent, too much information. Wow. Anyways, so on December 5th, not only did I attend a Grand Prairie Regional Tourism meeting, I had the pleasure of dropping the puck at the Grand Prairie Storm Czechoslovakia game, which kudos to the organizing committee and the board for bringing a different sort of spin and opportunity, I think, for Grand Prairie youth to experience in regards to hockey. So it was a really neat event. As well, that evening, I attended the Chamber of Commerce AGM and President's event. And in the past, the AGM is in the day, and Councillor Thiessen had the opportunity to swear in the new chair of the board. And as well, usually in the evening in January, they have a president's gala and thank the past president and welcome, past chair and welcome the new chair. This year was kind of cool because we, as a past president myself, we gathered sort of everybody that was available throughout the years and passed the gavel down to the new chair. So it was a nice event that they combined with the AGM, so it was nice to sort of have everything wrapped into one evening for people, and it was well attended, and people that attended really enjoyed the evening. I wanted to congratulate a friend of mine, Tab Pollock, who was given the Clem Collins Award for volunteerism, and it was something that I had the pleasure of receiving many years ago, but it was I've had a lot of opportunities to work with Tab in various volunteer roles over the years, and it's truly well deserved, so a big shout out to him and congratulations to him. As well, Lance Workington won an award that evening, and so congratulations to the Jeffries group of businesses. Other than that, I just wanted to say that today with Mayor Given, as mentioned, we hosted the City Hall staff here for some Christmas cheer. And so Merry Christmas to everyone. I know other councillor members are getting around this week or got around today to other departments. And I think that it was really nice to sort of see some faces that you don't always see, and nice to sort of have sort of a informal sort of Christmas gathering. So Merry Christmas to everyone that wasn't able to attend, and at that I'll leave it with Councillor O'Toole. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor O'Toole?
The Christmas cheer consisted of oranges and cookies.
Have one more thing.
Sorry, you've had your time.
I have one more thing.
Pass you back to...
Okay, thanks. Can I have one more thing, please, Mayor Given? Thanks. Yeah. I just want to give a shout out to another volunteer organization that I have the opportunity to sit with, a Grand Prairie group called Mamas for Mamas. And Mamas for Mamas is a new organization in the community. And I sit as the board chair on that organization, and there's a group of about 45 moms right now that lead the initiative to sort of be Kindness is the currency, but also a hand up for moms in need. They have a great Facebook page that you can jump on if any time as a mom you need some support. As simple as things if you ran out of diapers, or if you know you lost your job and truly need a Christmas hamper. So this year it was our first year going through Christmas as this organization. We put together a hamper program, and we initially thought we would work with 6 other agencies and take 3 hampers from each, and in turn fill 18 hampers. We worked with numerous agencies in Grande Prairie. We filled all 18 hampers, and then in turn took on 6 more. So big shout out to the Mamas for Mamas group for filling almost 25 hampers in a matter of about 10 days. So it was a great sort of piece to be part of this Christmas season. So thank you to everyone who supported the hampers. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Councillor O'Toole.
Okay, thank you. I would like to let you know that I attended at least 10 events over the last weeks, and I just want to speak a little bit on the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. We had 2 speakers, one being Scott Haggerty. Scott was a longtime RCMP officer that was involved in a crash that was instigated by someone ramming his vehicle and then ramming it again and ramming it again numerous times. When they brought him to the hospital, he wasn't expected to live, and so he doesn't have a lot of scars on the outside of his body, but internally he was shaken up pretty bad, so it took quite a while to get him back, not only physically but mentally back into work, and he spoke on that. And Scott's been a great friend of mine for a number of years. Also, Larry Gibson, he's had a child with MS, and he was also a leader in the community for the MS Society. So both gave very good speeches and heartwarming and emotional. So thank you very much.
Councillor Toole. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Boy, 7:15, I'm the last to go. So the last 2 weeks, I'll tell you, it was the best of times, the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It's the age of foolishness. It's the epoch of belief. It's the epoch of incredulity. In the interest of giving my colleagues a season of light and not making them give me a season of darkness, I'll be brief. And I'll point out that I went to the Coordinated Access Open House. So that is an initiative led by the city to start coordinating homeless support initiatives. And the idea of there's a lot of programs that probably have some duplication, and there's also probably some gaps in our community, and figuring out who's all doing what and how can we get better coordinated. So it was exciting to see that initiative. And then the other one I'll highlight is I got to go to the Scores dinner after Mayor Given's Scores meeting. It was great talking to our colleagues in the school boards and our colleagues in the college. It was a little bit frightening hearing some of the challenges they have with their fiscal situations. But I'm really looking forward to figuring out, are there ways that we can collaborate over the next couple of years as budget's becoming more and more reality for both them and us. I'd love us to have more conversations about how can we be more coordinated, how can we pull better together. So it's great to get to have some informal conversation with them.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. I'll just provide Council 2 updates. The first was on Saturday the 7th. I attended the swearing in of the induction of the officers of the Grande Prairie and Area Filipino Association. We have had an association for a long time. It had kind of gone dormant over the last few years, but there is a new group that is ready to reinvigorate the association. The event was held at the St. Joseph's Catholic Church in the hall, and there were, I would say, between 400 and 500 people in attendance. Just a really huge turnout, and people coming into the meeting were buying their memberships, and there was a line that didn't end of people buying their memberships to be members in the newly sort of reinvigorated association. So it was great to see, obviously, Grande Prairie's very strong Filipino community getting organized again to be active, not just sort of internationally, but here in our community as well. And so that was really good to see, and it was a real honor and pleasure to be there and represent City Council. And I also, over the course of the last week, had an opportunity to interact with another mayor from our region that we don't always work with, Mayor Bumstead of Dawson Creek. gave me a call last week. He was working with an advocacy group out of British Columbia who are working in support of an LNG facility, which is not a surprise for British Columbia because there's a lot of discussion about LNG there, but it's actually an LNG facility that's being proposed in Saguenay, Quebec. This facility has committed to taking natural gas from Western Canada for their process, and their advocacy group was looking to, I guess, rally the troops here, but specifically because in Quebec, concerns around fracking are often used as a bit of a boogeyman against resource development. And so the advocacy group was looking for community representatives from communities in areas where there is fracking to share their opinions about it in an open letter that could be circulated in Quebec as a part of the regulatory hearing and potentially shared in media there. So I really appreciated Mayor Bumstead connecting with me, and I was, of course, happy to sign on behalf of our council. I felt that that was something that we would be in support of. And I also took the liberty, with the support of our Economic Development Department, Rebecca Lee, and our Communications Department, in assisting them in editing that letter in a way that would be more representative of the views that I thought our council would be able to support. And that might be a little bit more convincing to some members of the public. And we also worked through the Northern Alberta Elected Leaders group to distribute that call for signatures or call for support for that letter. And so that went out last week as well through the Northern Alberta Elected Leaders. And I'm sure ultimately, if any other leaders in our region wanted to sign up with that, they'd go direct to the project proponent. But it was a great opportunity to collaborate on something that was meaningful to Dawson Creek's economy and to Grande Prairie's economy, and to be able to use some of these networks that we have in the north to invite others to join in support of that as well. And so I just wanted to highlight that for council as something that's happened in the last couple of weeks that you might not have known about. Considering that I sort of signed to say that Grande Prairie appreciates this kind of development and would like to see our natural gas resource in Canada used more widely and more widely than it is today. That's all I have to update council on. With that, Merry Christmas to all, and to all, good night.